So today we are going to cover our 4 grants, focusing on general operating support and Arts Everywhere programs, the panel review process, how our funding mechanisms work, how to submit your application through Submittable, the timeline for the whole process, and tips for submitting the strongest application possible. And again, we will definitely cover a Q&A. Okay, so we will start with some limitations and then important dates that apply to all of our programs. So the first to know is that organizations may apply for only one of these grants: Arts Everywhere, General Operating Support, Public Art and Murals, or Visiting Artists. One application per org for those. However, you can also apply for up to 2 Kansas Touring Roster Visiting Artist grants in addition to one of those 4 during each fiscal year. The grant period is July 1st, 2025 through June 30th of 2026. We sometimes call this the period of performance, and this is crucial because all activities and expenditures must happen within this period. So that includes both grant funds and matching funds. Extensions might be available in extraordinary circumstances, but you should definitely plan for your project to fit within those dates. And here's the most important date to write down. The deadline for all applications is 5:00 p.m. Central on February 28th, 2025. So that's for the 4 grant programs I just mentioned, except for Kansas Touring Roster Visiting Artist grants. Those are accepted on a rolling basis and just need to be received a minimum of 60 days in advance of the proposed grant activity. So let me repeat that deadline. Applications are due at 5 p.m. Central on February 28th. So please start your application now. Don't wait until the last minute or even the last day. The system will automatically stop accepting applications at the deadline, so starting early gives you time to ask questions, get help if you need it, that sort of thing. Today we'll discuss 4 distinct grant programs, each designed to serve different needs in our arts community. So the first is General Operating Support, Arts Everywhere, Public Art and Murals, and also Visiting Artists. Okay, so first, let's talk about General Operating Support grants, or GOS. These grants are like a foundation for established arts orgs. They help support your overall mission and operations, not just specific projects. So for General Operating Support, your maximum request amount is based on your total operating income from your last completed fiscal year. So this is your gross income from your last completed fiscal year without including capital campaign contributions or expenses. You can apply for up to 25% of that total operating income with a maximum request of $25,000. But here's the key: your organization must be primarily focused on arts and culture. So think of it like a bookstore versus a department store that has many things like clothes and appliances and also a book section. So the bookstore's core business is selling books, while the department store sells lots of things and books are a part of that. So similarly, we're looking for organizations primarily dedicated to the arts, not those where arts and culture are just one of many focus areas or are used to support the organization's main focus. So the arts will be the primary focus of your organization's stated mission statement for General Operating Support. General Operating Support grants can fund operations of public and private nonprofit arts and culture organizations, and that includes museums, local arts councils and arts commissions, statewide arts and cultural service organizations, and organizations that have cultural program activities in any of the arts and culture disciplines. So that includes music, dance, theater, creative writing, literature, architecture, painting, sculpture, folk arts, photography, crafts, media arts, visual arts, and other such allied major art forms, as well as programs of museums. For museums, this applies broadly. So not just art museums, but also science or history museums, zoos, arboreta, basically organizations that exhibit collections, whether those collections are works of art, historical artifacts, living collections like at a zoo, or other tangible objects to the public on a regular schedule. Okay, general operating support is meant to fund the day-to-day operations of arts organizations, which can include operating and programmatic expenses. It requires an arts and culture centered mission, like I mentioned before, and it's available only to arts and cultural organizations. Our next grant category is the Arts Everywhere program. This is our project-based grant program, so this includes a number of different options. Many of these grants are available for both arts organizations and non-arts organizations doing arts programming. And there are several subcategories for Arts Everywhere, so we will break those down. First, arts and education grants provide up to a maximum request of $10,000. Think of these as bridges between the arts world and education. So if you work in a school, maybe you want to bring in a professional artist or create after-school arts programs or develop a job training program in creative fields. That would be perfect for this. Next is innovative partnerships. So this category offers up to $20,000 for collaborations between arts organizations and non-arts entities. So for this, imagine a theater company partnering with a hospital to create a new drama piece with the patients, or a dance company working with a senior center to co-design a community courtyard that encourages movement that's specifically beneficial to older adults. So this funding really should do more than simply hiring an arts organization to do arts activities. It's really about both sides of the partnership, co-designing new initiatives together and integrate the arts in new ways. So the key here is using the arts to address a community need. Specific arts and culture projects. This category provides up to $10,000 for individual projects. So this could be anything from a community art project to a music festival to a cultural exhibition or an arts-focused lecture series, for example. Okay, and then organizational development. So within organizational development, we have two options. First is the capacity building grants, which are up to $5,000 to help you strengthen your organization. So think of these like investing in your organization's toolbox. Maybe you need a new financial software, or maybe your staff needs professional training, that sort of thing. Salary assistance grants are up to $20,000, and that's to help support critical staff positions. So this is specifically for smaller organizations with an annual operating income under $150,000. And I want to point out that within Arts Everywhere, the organizational development grants are only available to organizations with arts-based missions. While general operating support and Arts Everywhere share some features like similar applications and scoring criteria, they serve different purposes. So the difference is that general operating support supports overall operations, while Arts Everywhere funds specific projects or initiatives. And then some Arts Everywhere categories are open to organizations that don't have an arts-focused mission, but are doing arts programming. Okay, our third category, our Public Art and Murals program, provides up to $10,000 to activate public spaces through permanent and semi-permanent installations. So this program specifically focuses on creating lasting artistic impact in communities. If you're interested in more temporary or experimental types of public art projects, you'll want to look at the Arts Everywhere grant instead. And finally, our Visiting Artists grant helps bring professional artists into your community. So you can request up to $7,500 for non-roster artists, or up to $8,500 for artists from our Kansas touring roster. So something unique about this program, you can apply for up to 2 Kansas touring roster visiting artist grants in addition to one of our other 4 grants. So if you're working with a Kansas touring roster artist, you can receive up to $1,000 credit that can be applied to either your match requirement or your grant request. So just to recap, the key differences between the programs are: general operating support supports overall operations for arts organizations specifically. Arts Everywhere funds specific projects and is open to both arts and non-arts orgs. Public Art and Murals focuses specifically on permanent installations. And Visiting Artists helps bring professional artists to your community. We will talk about eligibility, who can apply for these grants. There's some basic eligibility requirements that apply across all of our programs, so we'll start there. First, you must be Kansas-based and be either a 501c3 nonprofit organization or a qualifying public entity. So when we say public entity, we mean local Kansas government entities such as school districts, state or local community colleges and universities, and also federally recognized tribal governments or organizations. So remember, private schools and universities need to have a nonprofit status in order to be eligible. Private schools do not qualify as public entities. All applicants need to have at least 1 fiscal year of completed arts programming under their belt before applying. You'll need to demonstrate this through your completed fiscal year operating budget. And though the Arts Commission, our fiscal year runs July to June, you should use whatever your fiscal year is in the application when you're asked to make note of that. So whether your fiscal year is July to June or January to December, or whatever you define as your fiscal year. 2 really, really important administrative requirements. First, you must have an active registration with the Kansas Secretary of State's Business Services Division, and you must have a unique entity identifier number, a UEI number from sam.gov at the time of your application. So if you don't have those now, you're strongly encouraged to start those processes today. Now we'll dig into some special situations. So the first is what we call independent components. This is particularly relevant for larger organizations like universities that might have multiple art programs. So for example, a university might have both an art museum and a theater program. Each could potentially apply separately if they meet these requirements. So an independent component must maintain year-round programming, have their own distinct budget separate from the larger university budget, operate with a separate mission, have an independent advisory board, maintain dedicated staff and volunteers, and offer programs open to the public. So entire departments or schools within a university don't qualify as independent components, and programs where students receive grades for participation also are not eligible. Okay, another special situation involves fiscal sponsors. So for Arts Everywhere, Public Art and Murals, and Visiting Artist grants, organizations that are not 501c3s might be able to apply through a partnership with a fiscal sponsor. So a fiscal sponsor is an established nonprofit that provides administrative and financial services for the project. And this arrangement comes with specific requirements. The fiscal sponsor can't employ your staff or board members. You need a formal signed agreement outlining the responsibilities, and a copy of that agreement must be provided as part of the application. The fiscal sponsor must provide real administrative services beyond just passing through funds, because the fiscal sponsor is the legally responsible entity for the grant. They are technically the applicant and also the grantee. So when you're filling out the application form and the name of applicant field, you'll want to use the name of the fiscal sponsor, not the name of the unincorporated organization. One note, General operating support grants cannot use fiscal sponsors, and for GOS, your organization must meet the eligibility requirements on its own. A couple more specific requirements. To apply for public art and murals, you'll need to demonstrate that your installation site is publicly accessible and that you have any necessary permissions or permits for that site. For visiting artist grants, the artist must come from outside your immediate community, specifically at least 60 miles away. So the project must include both a public presentation of some sort and at least one complementary activity beyond that main presentation that's meant to engage the community more deeply with the artist or the art form. So like a workshop or a talk or a masterclass. Okay, how much can you request? Let's talk about how much funding you can request through each program. The maximum amounts vary per program, and in some cases, your organization's total operating income, which is it means your gross operating income, not including any capital contributions or expenses. So for general operating support grants, you can request up to 25% of your total operating income from your last completed fiscal year, with a maximum request of $25,000. So for example, if your total operating income was $60,000 last year, you could request up to $15,000. And if your operating income was $150,000 or more, you could request the maximum of $25,000. All right, here's an overview of the limits. So for Arts Everywhere grants, each category has its own maximum request amount. The Arts and Education category provides up to $10,000 for projects that connect arts with education at any level. Our Innovative Partnerships category offers up to $20,000 for collaborations between arts organizations and non-arts entities. In the Organizational Development category, we offer capacity building grants up to $5,000 and salary assistance grants up to $20,000. And finally, our Specific Arts and Culture Projects category provides up to $10,000 for individual projects. The Public Art and Murals program provides funding for up to $10,000 for permanent and semi-permanent installations. This amount must cover both the creation and installation of the artwork. So think about the total project cost carefully when determining your request amount. And you can also think about phasing the project if you anticipate it taking longer than a year or needing significant additional funds. For a visiting artist program, the maximum request depends on whether you're working with an artist from our Kansas touring roster. For non-roster artists, you can request up to $7,500. And if you engage an artist from the Kansas artist roster, you can receive up to $1,000 credit that you can apply to either the match or to increase your grant request. So it just depends on the needs of the budget. Okay, let's talk about matching requirements. All our grants require a one-to-one match. So think of it like a partnership. For every dollar we provide, you need to bring a dollar to the table as well. So if you're requesting $5,000 from the state, your total project budget needs to be at least $10,000. And so you'll show in your project budget how you're matching our $5,000 with your $5,000. But here's where it gets interesting. For Arts Everywhere and general operating support, up to 50% of your match can come from in-kind donations. So an in-kind donation is any non-cash contribution that has real value. Let's cover some examples. If someone lets you use their space for free, the amount that they would typically charge rent for that space is considered in-kind. If you have volunteer ushers at an event, the amount that you would have paid them would be considered in kind. If you have someone that does your taxes pro bono, the amount they would typically charge, you could claim that as in kind. You'll find more information about calculating how those values in our guidelines. All public art and murals grants and visiting artist applications can include up to 75% in kind in their project budgets. And there's one important exception to this 50% or 75% rule, and it's a big one. If your organization is based in a rural opportunity zone county, so that's any Kansas county except Butler, Douglas, Johnson, Leavenworth, Reno, Riley, Saline, Sedgwick, Shawnee, and Wyandotte. So as long as you're not in one of those counties, your entire match can be in-kind donations. So that's any of the 4 grant programs. When you're calculating the value of these donations, use the amount you would have paid for those services. Again, you don't have to use the minimum wage, for example, for volunteers, unless the work that they're donating is really only worth minimum wage. You'll want to document and be thoughtful about how you arrived at the amounts, because the panelists might ask about that as they're reviewing your budget. For reference on rates and dollar amounts, you can use what's found at the Bureau of Labor Statistics website, and I think we will share that link and also drop it in the chat. Let's discuss what you can spend these grant funds on. For each program, we want to ensure that the funds are supporting arts and culture, right? While maintaining good stewardship of public resources. So for general operating support grants, you can use the funding for your day-to-day operational costs that just help you fulfill your mission. This includes expenses such as utilities, staff salaries, programming costs, administrative expenses, that kind of thing. Since this funding supports your overall operations, you have the most flexibility with these dollars. For project-based grants, which is the Arts Everywhere, Public Art and Murals, and Visiting Artists, the expenses must be directly connected to your specific project. So eligible expenses include artist fees, travel costs, accommodation expenses, project materials and supplies, marketing specifically for the funded project. For public art, it can include installation costs and any like equipment or rental costs. And also, these can also include staff time. It's just only the amount of staff time that's related to this specific project. Okay, we will talk through what isn't allowed. So across all of our programs, certain expenses or income are not allowed in the project budget at all. So that includes any state or federal funds, any activities from outside that grant period of performance, again, July 1 through June 30th. Capital expenditures for buildings or property, so that includes construction, acquisition, renovation, and such. Debts, contingencies, or financial fees like credit card fees, food and drink, private entertainment, activities that are not open to the public, mortgage payments, re-granting or making donations to other organizations, that's not allowed with grant funds. And then also payments to Department of Commerce employees is not allowed. And keep in mind, members of the Kansas Arts Commission field rep team are contractors, not employees. So they are working artists and they are able to be hired for grant funded projects, if that's applicable. Okay. These expenses can only be included in your project budget, but cannot be paid for with grant funds. They can be only on the match side. So this includes equipment costing over $5,000, property improvements, permanent fixtures, space rental, and building maintenance. Okay, for visiting artist grants, you'll want to pay special attention to travel and accommodation expenses. So these are definitely allowable costs, but just make sure they're reasonable and necessary for the project. And remember that visiting artists must come from at least 60 miles outside of your community. And then for public art and murals, installation costs and materials are allowable expenses, but any modifications to the installation site typically would be considered construction, and so that would fall under the match only side. So you can include site prep in your budget, but you'll just need to cover those costs with your matching funds. Okay, so the application process. All applications are submitted through our online submittable platform, and you can access that through the KAC website. The system is pretty straightforward to use, but if you're not familiar, go ahead and create an account and just familiarize yourself well before the deadline. One important distinction, again, while most of our grant applications are due February 28th at 5 o'clock, if you're interested in Kansas Touring Roster Visiting Artist grants, we do accept those on a rolling basis at least 60 days before the proposed event. Digging into the application. Your application will need to include several key components. So first, let's talk about the budget, my favorite component. All applications will include a project budget. For general operating support and Arts Everywhere applications, you will also need to submit 2 different budgets. So the project budget and also your annual operating budget. Let's start with the operating budget. As you see here, these figures go into a table that's in the application. So you'll just enter your figures directly into here. And it shows 3 fiscal years. So your last completed fiscal year, your current fiscal year, and your projections for the next fiscal year. And you will break your operating budget into these categories: personnel administrative, personnel programmatic, personnel technical or production based, outside fees and services that are programmatic, other outside fees and services, space rental, rent or mortgage, travel, marketing, and then all other remaining operating expenses. So this is really meant to be a complete picture of all your organization's expenses and income. So this includes in-kind donations, but there is a limit to how much in-kind you can include in the operating budget. So here's that formula, and this is in our guidelines. So don't be stressed about taking notes at this exact moment. If your total cash income is $250,000 or less, you can include in-kind donations up to 25% of that amount. And if your total cash income is over $250,000, you can only include in-kind up to 10%. You might have more in-kind support than these limits allow, and that's great. You can discuss any additional in-kind support in the narrative responses within the application, just to give greater context. Okay, for the project budget. So requirements for the project budget vary by program, so be sure to double check the guidelines for each program. But this is where you get to be specific about how you'll use the grant funds. Here's an example of a general operating support or Arts Everywhere project budget. For Arts Everywhere, Visiting Artist, and Public Art and Mural grants, it's the budget for your specific project. For general operating support grants, your project budget is your general operations. So it's basically your operating budget from the grant period, but with any non-allowable expenses removed. The applications for each program require specific supporting materials. So for all applications, you'll need at least one support material document. So this could be a letter of support, samples of flyers, samples of evaluations, pictures, that sort of thing. If you're using a fiscal sponsor, you'll need to include your signed fiscal sponsorship agreement that outlines both parties' responsibilities. And for general operating support and Arts Everywhere, your organization's most recent strategic plan will be asked for. So if that's available, definitely include that. For public art and mural applications, you will also need documentation of site permission, artist renderings or concept drawings if you have them, your installation timeline, and a maintenance plan. And for visiting artist grants, you'll need an artist contract or letter of intent, the artist bio and work samples, a detailed schedule of activities, and a marketing plan. All support materials should be in standard formats like a PDF, JPEG, or MP4. We recommend using the PDF format for documents whenever possible. And for video or audio submissions, please keep the samples under 2 minutes. So in this case, quality matters more than quantity. So you can submit up to 5 support materials, but focus on including your strongest and most relevant documentation. So each support material piece should be there to help panelists understand your organization's capacity and your project's potential impact. We've mentioned this before, but here's a crucial reminder. You must have a unique entity identification number, UEI number, from sam.gov in order to apply. So if you don't have one yet, go to sam.gov today and just get it taken care of. Don't wait, because you can't submit your application without it. And it's typically pretty quick to get one, but in case there's issues, you wanna know that now. Okay, next we'll discuss who will be reviewing your applications. After the deadline, KAC staff first reviews all applications for eligibility. Then the eligible applications go to our grant review panels. So panelists are practice artists, qualified professionals in their cultural disciplines, and we select them based on several factors, including experience and active involvement with arts and culture across the state or even across the nation, their familiarity with the grant review process, geographic representation, diverse perspectives and backgrounds, and specific expertise in different cultural areas. Okay, for scoring, for general operating support and Arts Everywhere, applications can earn up to 100 points total, and you need to score at least 80 points to be recommended for funding. So panelists use a rubric to help ensure consistent scoring. And the rubric is available on our website, and we recommend, take a look at it when you're writing your application. It can be really helpful. The points are divided across 4 main criteria. Excellence is up to 40 points, impact up to 30 points, management up to 20 points, and accessibility up to 10 points. So in each category, let's dig into some specifics. So for excellence, which is our highest weighted criterion at 40 points, panelists will examine your mission statement and how clearly it describes your organization, how well your programs support that mission, your goals and objectives, are they clear? Are they measurable? The quality of the proposed programming, your partnerships and collaborations, and then, of course, the support materials. So, for example, a theater company scoring high in excellence might show a clear mission focused on performing arts education and strong artistic personnel, evidence of successful past productions, and support materials like reviews or audience feedback. When evaluating impact, panelists will look at the scope and reach of your activities, thinking about who benefits from the programs and what's that geographic reach, what is the marketing and audience development plan, and also what is the economic impact for the broader community. And something crucial to understand about impact, bigger numbers aren't automatically better. So a focused program that serves 20 people intensively might score just as well as a festival serving thousands briefly. It's really about articulating what is the appropriate impact for your specific project and your specific community. For management, the panelists want to see sound budgeting and financial planning, clear evaluation methods, evidence of financial stability, and plans for sustainability. And strong applications show that you can complete the proposed activities. And then lastly, accessibility, which is worth 10 points, examines the physical accessibility of your facilities, programmatic accessibility, written policies and procedures, how you are training staff and volunteers in relation to accessibility, and efforts in numerous ways to include all audiences. So strong accessibility plans might include, do we need sign language interpretation? Do we have sensory-friendly programming? Sliding scale pricing, having materials in multiple languages, and a clear procedures for making accommodations when necessary. For public art and murals and visiting artist applications, they are evaluated slightly differently. They don't use the same rubric. The rubrics for public art and murals and visiting artists will be available on our website soon. For public art and murals, the categories that panelists will focus on will be project excellence, management plan, strategic goals and economic impact, community impact and engagement, and so that includes accessibility. The structure allows panelists to consider specific challenges and opportunities inherent in public art projects. So for visiting artist grants, panelists examine the overall project excellence, the specific artistic merit, the community impact and engagement, and then also community integration. Panelists will pay particular attention to how the visiting artists will interact with the community beyond their primary presentation. After panel meetings are completed, KAC will announce the available funds for each program. So the funding is distributed proportionally based on the panel recommendations. The funding distribution method differs by program, and this is important to consider when choosing which program to apply for. So for general operating support, we use a formula that considers both your score and your requested amount. So the key here is that everyone who scores above 80 will be recommended for some funding. You won't get more than you requested, and the minimum award is $1,000. For Arts Everywhere, public art and murals, and visiting artist grants, it works differently. So all of those recommended applications will go into a ranked list, a separate list for each program, and those will be ordered by score from highest to lowest. And we basically fund down that list until we run out of money allocated to each program. So that means not all recommended applications will receive funding, and the higher your score, the better your chances for funding. Here's how the timeline looks for this grant cycle. Applications are open and available now through February 28th at 5 o'clock Central Time. So can't emphasize that enough, that is the absolute cutoff. The system will not accept applications after 5 p.m. So again, don't wait until the last minute. And again, this is except the touring roster program. Those are accepted on a rolling basis year round. Okay, so after applications are submitted, staff and field reps will review your applications for basic eligibility. So if we find anything that's not allowed, like food in your project budget or something that doesn't quite make sense, we will contact you and send it back for corrections. So we will double check that all the important details are in place, that the math makes sense, your nonprofit status is up to date, that your registration with the Secretary of State, that sort of thing. And if you need corrections, you'll have a few days to do that. So this is important because applications have to pass this eligibility review in order to move on to the panel reviews. Panel reviews will happen in early April, and then the panel recommendations will be presented to the Kansas Arts Commission, and after that, they'll go to the Secretary of State and Lieutenant Governor Toland for final approval, with awards being announced May 1st. So that means during May and June, we will work with you to create contract agreements for those grants. And then you get to do the fun part. Then you get to actually do your grant activities. So Once we are past July 1st, that means the period of performance is active. That runs July 1, 2025 through June 30th, 2026. So that 12-month period. And remember, all grant activities and all expenditures for both the grant funds and the matching funds must happen during that period. So after the grant period ends, thinking way ahead to the summer of 2026, you will have 30 days to complete your final report. So that deadline would be the end of July 2026 to have final report, everything completely wrapped up. Okay, we've given a lot of info and we are almost at the end. Tips. As we've said, start early. Don't wait until the last minute. Give yourself time to gather materials and ask questions. Second, read the guidelines thoroughly. They are thorough and they contain crucial details about what's allowed and what isn't. Make sure your budget numbers and your math checks out across the whole application. It never hurts to double check your math. Include strong support materials. They definitely make a difference. And remember, you need at least one, but you can include up to 5. Be specific in your responses. So instead of saying, we serve the community, tell us exactly how many people you'll serve and in what ways, which specific facets of the community you're referring to. Tell us about your evaluation methods. How will you know if your program is successful? And how will you measure that? Be clear about your accessibility efforts. If you've completed the Section 504 self-evaluation workbook from the National Endowment for the Arts, you will have a chance to mention it in the application. And if you're not sure what that is, there are links to it in the application also. Make sure that all of your organizational registrations are current. So especially your Secretary of State registration and your UEI number. And then again, pay attention to the in-kind limits in both your operating and project budgets. Okay, and finally, answer the question that is asked. That is very important. In the next week or so, we'll be posting some high-scoring applications from last year on our website, so you can take a look at those examples. We are offering open office hours starting next week. In January, we'll do Mondays and Thursdays. And then starting in February, we will add Wednesday mornings. So that's just a time to pop in, ask any questions, or just double check something. It's just open time that will be virtually via Zoom. And yeah, you can pop in and ask questions. Okay, whew. I've been talking for a long time. Thank you all for listening. We've covered a lot of information. I'm sure we have questions in the chat to go through. If we don't get to your question, or if you have more questions later, please reach out for assistance. I'm excited to dive into Q&A, but yes, here's our team. Any of these lovely humans are available to assist and answer questions. So feel free to reach out anytime. But now, yeah, what questions do we have? Ben, do you want to?
Yeah, I'll just go through what we have got. Quite a few here in the chat. We'll get through those, and then after we do take care of those, then we'll see if there's any additional chat questions or people that want to verbalize their questions. We'll take care of that afterwards. So Richard asks, since salaries are often part of a general operating support, which is better to apply for, general operating support or salary assistance? What are the differences in the requirements and the review process?
Okay, that's a great question. Excuse me. I will say staff can't specifically tell you which to apply for, but you are correct that the review processes and kind of the formulas are a little bit different for each. So again, I would recommend that you read through the guidelines and take some time to be thoughtful about it. First of all, for salary assistance, that's only available to organizations with operating budgets under $150,000. So that's one thing to keep in mind. And then the other thing to keep in mind is the way the funding is distributed. So for general operating support, all organizations receiving funding have to score above an 80, and then those organizations are funded through a formula. So basically, the higher your score, the higher percentage of your request you would receive, up to $25,000. Whereas for salary assistance, that is part of the general Arts Everywhere pool of funding. So for those, any application receiving a score over 80 goes into a ranked list, and then that list is funded depending on how much funding we have to give. So the higher your score, the farther up on that list your application would be, and the more likely you'll receive funding. So I can't say like this is what you should do, but I would say refer to the guidelines, think about what makes the most sense for your organization.
Alrighty, and Jonathan asks, do local governments need the Secretary of State letter?
Local governments would not be registered as a business entity, so no.
Kevin asks, for independent components, does a 100% volunteer division qualify if they don't provide or receive staff support from other divisions or components, or do they have to have, I think, paid staff is what he's asking?
No. If I'm understanding, this is a perfect question for office hours when we can just chat through the specifics about it. But my sense is for an independent component that meets all other aspects but doesn't have paid staff, my guess is that you would still be eligible. But that's a great one to just double check via email or by popping into office hours so we can really dig into specifics.
Okay, and Shaylin asks, will there be some details later about organizational responsibilities for matching funds? I'm not sure I fully understand that, Shaylin. If you wanted to chat a follow-up there, we can, or does that make sense to you, Kate?
Organizational responsibilities for matching funds. Again, I addressed it already.
Oh, okay.
Sweet.
All right, very good. Well, we'll move on. Thanks. Okay, and opportunities for artists. There are no opportunities for artists to apply directly for funding, including murals. Bill, I believe that's fair to say, Kate?
That is correct. At the moment, all of our funding, or our funding is only for 501c3 nonprofit organizations, units of local government, or federally recognized tribes.
Catherine asks, I run the arts and enrichment programs for the rec center in a small town. How would the independent advisory board work in my situation?
Again, without being able to just like chat about it, I'm not sure I can give a fully accurate. But basically, as if you have a group that, or some kind of oversight that's specific to your activities. I don't know.
And again, oh yeah, I was just going to say again, maybe a good question for office hours where you can really talk through the nitty gritty of your situation.
Yeah,
with
for sure.
Staff. Very good. And let's go on down to Richard. Okay. Does the matching funds for salary assistance have to be related to the employee's salary, or can other organizational expenses be used?
I would want to double check the guidelines myself, but my sense is that other organizational expenses would make sense because for salary assistance, that the activities of that position are supporting the organization. So I would double check, but I think other organizational expenses would be fine.
Monica has a question about her submittable login. She's having problems with the login, wondering if she should contact them directly. I maybe suggest that you contact one of us, just maybe you could email me, benjamin.stanton@kas.gov, and we'll see if we can work through that. And if we can't, then we'd turn it over to submittable if that's appropriate. But we may be able to help you, I hope.
Yeah, sometimes we can help with things like that, and sometimes we can't. Although, knock on wood, Submittable has a track record of being fairly helpful with that type of thing. So, but yes, to start with Ben is great.
And Tiffany, if our organization was awarded a general operating support grant this fiscal year, 24-25, yes, you are eligible to apply again this round.
Yes.
Going on down, Debbie says we answered her question. And Connie's asking about independent art groups who have a fiscal sponsor.
Asking like, are they eligible?
Connie, I can allow you to unmute. Would you want to just vocalize your question so we make sure we... Hopefully that works. Are you able to unmute now?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sure can. Go ahead.
Okay, yes. So what about independent arts groups who have a fiscal sponsorship and that 501c3 is not a primary arts organization?
So the fiscal sponsor is not primarily an arts organization?
Correct.
So that's fine as long as it's not for general operating support.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for the question. Great. Okay, and going down to Bill's question, he's saying a nonprofit based in Missouri that works with mural artists to create public art cannot apply. I think that is correct. They can't apply unless the application comes from a partnership with a Kansas nonprofit.
That is accurate. Yes. At the moment, we can only fund organizations based in Kansas. And we have helped some organizations switch their registration as makes sense, or not help, advised them on how to do that. Because that is obviously a very common thing. But Bill, that's another thing that we could just talk about and like really dig into the specifics of, either via email or in office hours.
And a reminder that before the end of today, there will be an email sent to the email you use to register for this webinar that has the slides and the office hour link and a few other information bits there. I think we can go, if there are people that have questions they want to vocalize, we can do that. Just raise your hand virtually. Click on your little Zoom hand there if you see that on your screen. And then we can kind of go through an order of whoever wants to raise their hand. And we'll give it a minute to let that chime in, or if you want, you can throw something else in the chat here. Still have a few minutes before the end here. Everyone's question has been answered thoroughly. Perhaps.
That's amazing and suspicious.
Yeah, well, things do always come up as you go along. We understand that. Feel free to those email addresses on your screen right now are a good resource. And then this email later today will have that office hour link.
Oh, Joanna just put, this is a great question. Can the Kansas Touring Artist Grant be used to pay multiple artists for a single event? Yes. And actually the Visiting Artist Grant in general, if you want to, if you're planning a series or a festival, and you want to use the visiting artist funding or the Kansas Touring Roster visiting artist funding for across numerous artists, that's completely fine as long as each artist still does the primary presentation and the complimentary event. But more than one artist is totally fine. You would want to still frame it as a single, like the project is a single visiting artist project. It just encompasses numerous artists, if that makes sense.
And Shaylin has a question about the economic impact of art, how that's calculated. And I think we're talking about the impact portion of things.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite questions in the whole wide world. And there's not a singular or simple answer. There are a ton of resources in terms that relate to how to approach this. And we can definitely share some of those in the email that'll come out later. But I would say to really think about the impact on your local community. And like when you think about the project and what's going to happen in your local community and how you see that project impacting the economics of maybe it's your neighborhood, maybe it's your town. What does that look like? Does it look like X number of local artists are going to be hired to do X number of activities? Does it look like we're doing this festival and that typically means we have X number of people getting hotel rooms and spending money at our restaurants? Like that, thinking about it kind of small scale. And again, just like with one of the other impact questions, I think articulating the specific economic impact for your project and your community is more important than trying to get the highest number possible, right? Like if you can say like, well, this is what we're proposing to do, and based on that, XYZ, we think the economic impact is this, and this is why that's important. It might not be as big a number as some other applications, but that's okay, right? This is specific, what makes sense for your project.
Alrighty, and Debbie has a question about contracted employees. Can they be covered by salary assistance, like a musician, instrumentalist?
Oh, that is also a great question that I don't feel confident answering without looking at the guidelines. Let's both look back at the guidelines and just see specifically what the language is there. We can drop the link to the guidelines in the chat, and yeah, off the top of my head, I can't say. I would want to double check.
Sounds good. And then let me just go. I've dropped those in the chat a couple times, but I'll just throw it at the top here again. Then the question about using back to the touring artist roster grant, having 2 artists, is that 2 applications or 2 on one?
You would want us to submit 1 application. That's what I was trying to articulate about, like, keep it as a singular project that includes multiple artists or multiple events. Like then your project is like this visiting artist series, for example. That will just keep things a lot simpler for you and for us, actually. And again, that's the kind of thing too, that if shoot us an email or pop into office hours and we can happily talk through the nitty-gritty of that. No problem.
And unless anyone wants to raise their hand so I can allow you to unmute or throw another quick question, but we're at the end of our time. Just wait a second here. I'm not seeing any hands. I think that's all we've got for now.
All right. Thank you all for joining. And again, we know questions will come up, and that's perfectly fine. We will do our best to be resources, and there are also a lot of resources on the website. So we will follow up, and we look forward to working with you and finding out about all the amazing projects that you're no doubt already doing. So thanks for being here. We'll share more very soon.